Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about my top 5 favorite series of all time so far. These are going to be not bound by genre or age range or anything like that, just the 5 series that I like the most. However, for it to count, I do have to have finished the series, so obviously any series that are not complete yet, not fully published, cannot be included. So let's get into it. This will not include spoilers. I'll give kind of a general overview of the books when I talk about them, but I won't be including spoilers. But before I get into the 5 series that I like the most, I actually have some honorable mentions first, because I am so bad at choosing favorites that I chose a bunch of like extra almost favorites to go along with them. I'm not going to be saying these in any particular order, like I'm not numbering which ones are like my favorite and so on and so forth. I'm just gonna kind of list them. The first honorable mention that didn't quite make it into my favorites, but that is so close, is the Sea of Ink and Gold trilogy. It's also known as the Reader trilogy later. On the spines of the first 2 books, it says the Sea of Ink and Gold. Later, it is known as the Reader. I think this was probably to make it a little bit more well-known, so that when they say the Reader trilogy, then they know that this is the first book in it. I really like the title of the Sea of Ink and Gold, so I'm gonna refer to it as that. I'm going to do my best to keep each of these descriptions kind of brief because I can go on for so long. So this series is basically about this girl named Sephia whose parents died when she was young. Then she was taken in by a family friend, kind of a guardian. And at the point where the story kicks off, that guardian has been taken from her by a mysterious group. Sephia is doing her best to find out what this group is. And one of the ways that she's doing that is she has this mysterious object left behind by her parents, who the guardian told her to never even remove from its casing, but she is trying to figure out what this object is and why this group is after it, because when they were looking for the guardian, they were like, we need the thing, and the guardian was like, I don't have it, while Sephia was hiding in the bushes. So Sephia knows that the thing is extremely important, and it turns out that what the thing is a book. I can't really say any more than that as far as Sephia goes, but there's also a storyline going on about this pirate captain, Captain Reed. I love him so much. So you have Sephia's story as well as Captain Reed's story and the ways that they intersect and everything that kind of trickles out from there. It's a high fantasy, it's YA, and I really love it. I love the characters. I think the series does a great job of fleshing out the characters in interesting ways. I really like the way that the story progresses and the lore that we get like slowly over time, finding out exactly why the world works the way that it does, and seeds that are planted in the first book, the way they come out in the third book. All of it was just really great. The reason why it's in my honorable mentions rather than in the all-time favorites is because for me, the ending was just kind of abrupt. I enjoyed it and I liked what happens. It was definitely very surprising. It kind of kept me on my toes the whole time, but I would have liked a little bit more time with the aftermath of the ending, a little bit more of like a dismount from the series, like a little bit gentler of an ending slope. When I first read it, I was kind of disappointed with the ending, but the more I think about it, the more I like it. I definitely think this is one of those series that you really have to sit on. I have already read The Reader twice. I will be reading the whole trilogy again, and I just love this author. So if you're looking for a YA high fantasy adventure type story that's a little bit more slow paced, a little bit more lyrical and mysterious, I would definitely recommend this. I'm realizing I didn't say this before, but that was written by Traci Chee, who also wrote 1,000 Steps Into Night, which is a fantastic standalone. The second series on my honorable mentions list is the Mistborn trilogy. This is by Brandon Sanderson, who is an extremely well-known fantasy author. This series kind of crosses the line between YA and adult fantasy. I think the strong points were definitely in the world building and the magic system, just the really clean, clear way the magic system is written out and discovering all the lore of the world. That was definitely my favorite part of the series. I did also really enjoy the characters, but it took a little bit more time for me to get there. Like, I feel in book 1 that we only had really 1 or 2 characters properly fleshed out. All these other side characters that were meant to be really important to the series didn't really feel fully developed until book 3. So that's why it's in honorable mentions rather than in my favorites. However, I am going to be reading the series again. All of these I'm going to read again. That's why they're here. I do wonder how I'll feel when I go through it again. But there were also some writing style moments that I felt were a little bit unpolished. So for those reasons, it's not in my favorites, even though I really enjoyed it and I can't wait to read more of Brandon Sanderson's work. Next honorable mention is the Six of Crows duology. I feel very weird putting these on my honorable mentions rather than in my favorites. They almost made it to the favorites, which I guess is the point of honorable mentions. If you're on BookTube, you probably know what Six of Crows is about. It's a found family heist situation, and it is awesome. It's super funny, super moving. There's a lot of really interesting moments. It keeps you reading, and for all those reasons, I really loved it. The reason why it's not in my actual top 5 is basically it just got edged out by the other books. I guess I would say the things that I find about it that are imperfect are there are a couple moments where the voice didn't feel as consistent to me, and for some reason those moments really just like stand out in my mind. While this is an extremely engaging series and I think the characters all have a lot of depth and intrigue to them, it didn't stick with me in the same way that the other books on my actual favorites did. It didn't have the same sort of emotional impact that these other books did. Even though it did have a high emotional impact, it just wasn't quite there. So basically what I'm saying is that it would be number 6 on the list. Next honorable mention is the Cruel Prince trilogy. This is another one that was really difficult to not put in my favorites list because in this series, I love the world and the fairy politicking and the fairy rules. There are just so many things that I adore about this series. I also have this other How the King of Elfheim Learned to Hate Stories. I don't know if this counts as part of the series. It's more like an auxiliary read, but I really enjoyed this too. I just love this series. The reason that I didn't put it in my top 5 is, once again, it basically just got edged out by the other ones. And the final series in the honorable mentions is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor. The reason why this one is not in my top 5 favorites is because for my top 5 favorites, I just wanted to have one series per author. And also on that list of my favorites is Strange the Dreamer. So basically, I just didn't want to put Laini Taylor on there twice. Otherwise, it would be right up in there with the rest of them. I absolutely adore this series. The only reason why it's not in there is because I like Strange the Dreamer even more. And with that in mind, we can hop right into my actual favorites. And the first one on it is going to be, of course, Strange the Dreamer. So this is the duology Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. This is kind of a difficult series to talk about what the plot actually is. The book is set up in a way where it's very easy for things to be spoilers, but basically it's about this librarian. His name is Laszlo. It's a high fantasy, and Laszlo has grown up absolutely loving this place that is called Weep. Weep is its new name. It used to be called something else, but nobody remembers what it was due to magic. That old name was like erased from existence and replaced with Weep. Laszlo is obsessed with Weep. He is basically like a scholarly expert on Weep, but the problem is that Weep doesn't accept outsiders. You can't go there. So Laszlo has basically always been dreaming of Weep, and he has been always unable to go. And then some things happen that relate to Laszlo. I know it sounds like not a lot is happening, and it is kind of a slow-paced book because the author really takes her time describing a lot of the details of the world. It is very immersive to me. It's so like whimsical and vibrant and bright. Like if you like the sort of feeling from the Caraval series where it's like everything is so magical and whimsical and colorful and like in your mind, I think you would really enjoy enjoy Strange the Dreamer if you haven't read it yet. I don't want to go into it too much, but the series does cover some extremely heavy and intense topics, and the themes are so interesting and powerful and sometimes extremely challenging, and the characters are fun and interesting and deep, and I just love this series so much. If I had to pick just one all-time favorite series, it would be Strange the Dreamer. I don't have to though, so I'm going to tell you about some other favorites that I have. I see a lot of people talk about Strange the Dreamer, so you've probably heard about it before. So how about a series that you probably know less about, except for it's one that I mention all the time. This is All the Wrong Questions by Lemony Snicket. You might know Lemony Snicket from his series, A Series of Unfortunate Events, about the Baudelaire kids who basically have to face off against Count Olaf again and again and again while he assumes multiple different disguises. I don't know why I'm telling you that, because that has nothing to do with what this book series is. So if you've read A Series of Unfortunate Events, then you probably know / remember that throughout the series and on the back of the book, there is the narrator, Lemony Snicket, who is kind of a character, like very loosely in their stories, but he has like a very distinctive voice. So what All the Wrong Questions is about is it's actually a prequel series. It's about Lemony Snicket as a 13-year-old, where A Series of Unfortunate Events is a little bit of a satire of Gothic novels. All the Wrong Questions is similarly kind of a satire on crime noir novels. You have the typical genre trope. So you have this like hard-boiled type detective, which is 13-year-old Lemony Snicket in this case. In each book, there's like a mystery crime situation that needs to be solved. There's even a femme fatale. I love this series for many reasons. One, Lemony Snicket is so funny. He has just the best dark sense of humor, and I absolutely adore it. Two, the mystery. The mystery is always fantastic. It's one of the most compelling elements, I think, of A Series of Unfortunate Events. In these books, the mystery component is even stronger because it is front and center in each of the books. What happened to get us here? Also, I feel that the writing style, he has upped his game even from the Series of Unfortunate Events style. So it is a little bit lyrical. It's very funny. It's still got that dark kind of sense of humor. And as before, it follows children who are trying to make the best of a extremely difficult situation. So I've been kind of vague about this. Let me kind of hone in on what the series actually is. It follows Lemony Snicket. Like I said, he's apprenticing at a mysterious organization. If you've read A Series of Unfortunate Events, then probably you know what the mysterious organization is. That said, you don't have to have read A Series of Unfortunate Events in order to read All the Wrong Questions. It's just a really fun, interesting, engaging, sometimes heartbreaking series that follows mysteries and these really wonderful characters. I really liked the characters in A Series of Unfortunate Events, but I don't feel that the Baudelaires, for example, are all that distinct from one another. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny are all really similar in personality versus like what they can do. They each have their own skills, but they all have pretty similar personalities. And I say all of that because in this series, I feel that the characters are pretty distinct. And that was another thing that I really loved about this series. The setting, the cast, the mysteries, all of it is so fantastic. I feel that the ending was more satisfying than the ending of A Series of Unfortunate Events. So if you have read A Series of Unfortunate Events and no longer trust Lemony Snicket, please give him another try, because I feel that this ending is a little bit, I don't want to say better, but more ending-like than that ending. I don't know if I sold that well, but the series is very good, and I love it so much. Okay, so I'm kind of going to cheat with this next one, because like I said, I am really bad at picking favorites, and the honorable mentions just wasn't enough for me. So the next series that I'm going to pick is the Trials of Apollo series by Riordan. I say I'm cheating because it is kind of a tie with the Heroes of Olympus. I had a really hard time picking which one of these I was going to put, so instead I kind of didn't, and I just put the whole thing. I didn't include Percy Jackson in this, I guess because it's been a million years since I read that series and it's not quite as powerfully powerful in my mind as these other ones. If I have to pick just one, I pick Trials of Apollo because I think our main character has the most interesting struggle over the 5 books. And let me back up. Trials of Apollo takes place chronologically after Heroes of Olympus, and it follows Apollo. He has been cast down from Olympus and given a mortal body, a frail teenage mortal body by Zeus as punishment for his relationship to things that happened in Heroes of Olympus. He has to complete these tasks in order to regain his godlike form. So that's his goal. And throughout the books, we get to follow up with a bunch of the characters from the previous 10 Percy Jackson books. The reason that I picked this one over the other two series is basically I really related to a lot of the struggles that happen to the other main person in this book series. Again, I'm trying to be vague and there are lots of twists and turns. There is another person who Apollo is frequently with. I really related to that person, but I also really liked Apollo's voice. I really appreciated how Rick Riordan didn't shy away from making Apollo just not a good dude in the first book. So like selfish and arrogant and reckless. And I really loved seeing him come to terms with mortal weakness and mortal flaws and what it means to be a human versus what it meant to be a god. It was also just really fun getting to see what all the characters from the previous series were up to. And I loved the characters that were brought up in this one. That person that I mentioned that is usually with Apollo, I think a lot of people do not like them. To be honest, I did not like them at first either, but they really grew on me. The book series made me cry a lot. I love, again, the villains I think are so strong. The villains in the previous two series, like the biggest bads, you know who I'm talking about. If you've read them, I liked them, but I felt that they provided less of a distinct, direct thing that you could challenge versus the ones that are set up here. They're more accessible. They're more like a villain that you can face, as opposed to the two in the previous books. The reason why I love this is basically these books are all just such wonderful adventures. They are such a great time. They've always been great for pulling me out of reading slumps. They're just really deeply fun to read. And they also have really interesting characters. The ways that Rick Riordan modernizes the gods and turns them around and makes them a fun new concept has always been fantastic. I've always been a big fan of Greek myths, so seeing them like brought into the modern age in this really interesting and unique way, I absolutely love it. And I adore this series. I feel like a lot of people read Heroes of Olympus and then stopped and did not continue with Trials of Apollo because Percy is not the main character. I assume that's the reason. But I really think that if you're a fan of the Heroes of Olympus, you should give Trials of Apollo a shot. Okay, next is my attempt to not be cheaty about this. So this next one is The Dark Artifices by Cassandra Clare. And the reason that I say that I'm trying not to be cheaty about it is because I could have easily just said the Shadowhunters Chronicles, and that would not be wrong. I do love all the Shadowhunters series, but I really wanted to try and limit myself to just one of the series within the series. If the last book in the Last Hour series were out, probably that would be on here instead of The Dark Artifices. But since it's not, my next favorite under that is The Dark Artifices. So to give you kind of an idea of what this is about, I have to tell you what the Shadowhunters Chronicles is about overall. And basically the concept is that there exist in the universe demons. In order to save humanity from the demons, a long time ago, the angel Raziel created Shadowhunters with his blood. The Shadowhunters, also known as Nephilim, are part angel. They have the blood of the angel running through them, and because of that, they're a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, and a lot more able to murder demons than most humans. They also typically have runes on their body, which allow them to have even more supernatural abilities. When somebody really needs to like be a spy, for example, someone will give them a rune that will enhance their vision or their hearing, or it will allow them to be a little bit sneakier. There's like a sure-footed rune so that you can balance on things more easily. And then those burn up or fade over time as you use them. So each of the series within the Shadowhunters series follows a small group of these Shadowhunters as they deal with a particular part of the problem of the universe. And this is an urban fantasy, so it's like Earth, but also there are demons. And with that, there's also a thing called Downworld, which is basically the name for non-human, non-demon creatures. So they're magical creatures, but they don't fall into those other categories. They're also not Shadowhunters. So Downworld is further split up into 4 separate factions: the vampires, the werewolves, the fairies, and the warlocks. And so each of the series deals with a group of Shadowhunters, probably some element of Downworld. Usually it's like, oh, the fairies are doing a thing, or some evil warlock is warlocking about. And so usually the series follow the intersection of that. They also deal with a lot of magical racism from the Shadowhunters against Downworld, usually, or sometimes Downworld against Shadowhunters. So the Dark Artifices within that follow chronologically the Mortal Instruments. They take place, I want to say, 4 or 5 years after the events of the Mortal Instruments. The 2 main leads are Emma Carstairs and Julian Blackthorn. Emma is basically a warrior prodigy. Her favorite thing to do is train. She's kind of like a jock. So she's really strong, incredibly good with her sword. She has a magical sword that's been handed down over time. It's called Cortana. And she's incredibly talented at fighting demons. Julian is her parabatai. Parabatai is a type of Shadowhunter bonding, which is basically like your best friend, but it's kind of like getting married, the way that you're bonded to them forever, but it's magical. And also, it's platonic. So they're your best warrior buddy. They will always have your back. They're like the other half of you, but in a completely non-romantic way. So they're the person who you will be back to back fighting demons against, because your parabatai knows you like nobody else can. Basically, how you get this is that you have a best friend, you prove that you two are meant to be parabatai, you go through this whole magical ceremony, and then there's a permanent rune that each of you has that makes you parabatai. So Emma and Julian are parabatai. Remember how I said no romance allowed? That's important in this series. I'm not going to say too much else, but keep that in mind for kind of an idea of what the series is about. Meanwhile, Emma is also trying to solve the mystery of her dead parents. This is not a spoiler. Her parents are dead from the beginning of the book, and so basically she's trying to find out what exactly happened to them. Now, it's been a while since I have read this series, but basically the reason why I love it is because of one of my all-time favorite characters, Julian. Julian has a lot going on. He has made some choices that he is now regretting. Julian and Emma are a great couple of leads. I feel that each of them has a lot of depth and there's a lot of interest. As usual with Cassandra Clare books, I love the romances that she gives to her main leads. And this one is my favorite so far. I thought it was the most compelling. I love all the side characters and seeing how the problems of the world keep evolving over the course of like the Mortal Instruments, the Infernal Devices, the Dark Artifices. That is always really interesting. How the Clave is treating Downworld and how Downworld treats the Clave, and the Clave being the governing body of the Shadowhunters. I love demon hunting. I love the way Cassandra Clare does romance and character and the world building. Go a lot of really fun places in this trilogy in particular, and that is why until Chain of Thorns comes out, this is my favorite Shadowhunters series. My final favorite series is Fruits Basket. I don't know if you can see that up here. By Natsuki Takaya. So this series is a manga series that came out, I think, in the mid-1990s, early 2000s, would be my guess. Maybe a little bit later. Because I know I started reading them in high school. So, yeah. So early 2000s, I think would be right, is when they started coming out, at least in America. And there are definitely some things that are a little bit not my favorite in certain relationships, but looking past that, there are so many things in this series that I love. It's about a girl named Toru who is in high school, and she meets the Soma family. And the Soma family has a curse. And the curse is that if they hug a person of the opposite sex, they transform into an animal. Only 13 of them have this because those 13, they carry the spirit of an animal from the Chinese zodiac. So Toru's story kind of starts when she gets taken in by a small section of the Soma family, and she meets a couple of the inhabited, we'll say, members of the family. So there is an element of magic in this series, but that's not really what the series is about. It's really more about family trauma, which is interesting to say because I also feel that this story is extremely wholesome and lighthearted. Even though we go into a lot of really intense topics, for some reason the series always feels very like fluffy and comfy and comforting to me. I have loved it for a long time. I finished reading it a couple of years ago. I'm going to be reading it again soon. It does definitely get heavy in certain points. And like I said, there are a couple things that I was a little bit like, I don't know about that. But for the most part, I really love it. Toru, as well as the two other main leads, Yuki and Kyo, I absolutely adore them as characters. I love seeing how they grow and change and develop over the course of the series. I felt that their issues that they struggled with were all very reasonable, very real. And basically the curse is just like a reason why a lot of this family trauma has occurred. And then it is sometimes an obstacle, but the curse is really not what the story is actually about. I absolutely love the series. It's both nostalgic and I think just really well done overall. It's super funny. There are so many things about it that I absolutely love. Thank you for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble about all of my favorite series. I hope you found something that sounds good to you that you might want to check out and try reading in the future. Or if you have read all of these books and hate them, please tell me why I am wrong. Or if, like me, you like them, please tell me which one of these is your favorite. Thanks again, and have a beautiful night, universe.